Welcome to Succession Planning for CRCs, the program that helps you to put in place a succession plan for your Community Resource Centre. I'm Andrew Huffer, and today I'm joined by the most magnificent John Denton. Welcome back, John.
Good day, Andrew. Pleasure to be here, as always.
And a big hello to the fantabulous Lee Steele from the Pindgelly CRC. Welcome, Lee.
Thanks, and thanks for having me.
Always good to have you on board, Lee. How are things looking in Pindgelly at the moment?
Wonderful. The rain is pouring, the farmers are smiling, and life's looking pretty good.
Always happy to hear this. We're into episode 3 now of our program, of our 5-episode series. So today we're going to be taking you through to information management. First, a quick recap from episode 2. So we talked about where you are in the succession planning process, helping you to understand how you're positioned and how ready you are to get into that succession planning. We also talked about the skills you have within your CRC and the importance of having a succession planning skills matrix to help you understand what you got and what you need. We also looked at some strategies that you need to have in place to develop or attract the skills and the people you need both onto your board and into your staffing group. Our focus for today is on information management. We're going to talk about a couple of key things here. We're going to firstly talk about having the value of having a structured information management system for your CRC. We're also talking about the steps you need to take to have it, put it in place, to actually set it up, and how to manage it. So we've got a pretty much an action-packed episode which, as usual, is going to give you the practical steps that you need to take to make it work. John, I'm looking forward to hearing from you about why you should bother with it and how we can manage our system. So John, why should we bother setting up an information management system? Some ideas from you, please.
Yes, it's a very good question, Andrew. I'm glad you asked. So why would you bother? With any organisation, and particularly with CRCs, you're in a situation where you've got a lot of data, a lot of information that you're collecting for all sorts of reasons, and you've got a whole variety of people who are using and accessing that data and changing it and updating it. And so having an information management system is a way of ensuring that everybody can get access to it and that it's recorded and kept in a standard format. So there's some key things to think about. One is, who are the users of the information? As I say, in a CRC in most organisations you've got a lot of different people accessing the information, and of course you're going to get changes of personnel as well. So another reason of bothering to have an information system is to make sure that new people coming on board can get access to that information, and that when people leave, they leave the information behind. So you've got continuity within the CRC. And it's also a stress insurance. And by that, I mean, because it's easier to find the information and people know where and how to access it, then it reduces that stress. There's an inordinate amount of time, Andrew, wasted in organisations that don't have information management systems. Time wasted just trying to find things, trying to hand things over. Am I looking at the latest version of a particular document or things like that? So it can get very, very stressful and very difficult. So we're fortunate to have Lee with us today from Pindgelly CRC, and Lee's going to give us some sanity checks on what happens in real life, aren't you, Lee?
I absolutely am, because it took us a long time to realise how important succession planning was for our CRC. And it is worth the bother, because at the end of the day, the stress reduction is huge. You really should consider having a good succession plan in place, and one that's very easy to follow and understand. Not for the people at the high end of your CRC to understand, but for the whole of the CRC, your volunteers and your staff and your committee. Succession planning will bring you all together, it'll unite you.
Lee, I've got a question for you just in terms of John mentioned about you've got multiple users of information. Tell me about who in a typical, say, week in your CRC, who would be some of the people who need to access information within the CRC?
It starts with those that are there every day. We're all part-time workers, so between us we're moving each day between jobs, and then we have our volunteers. We have some of our committee that come in and interact around us to do the duties that they need. We also have people using our centre, so if we don't have good plans in place and understandings of all those processes, then it can make a very complicated day and we all just spend all day walking around in circles. So succession plans to us are about creating straight lines, get you there in an easy place.
Okay, and I guess the whole interchange of information between people coming into the organisation and people leaving is a critical thing as well.
Yes, definitely. We actually we did all the right things and downloaded some good YouTube things on succession planning, and we read some books, and we started and we planned something that was so gigantic that we didn't realise it was going to be irrelevant. So we started at the wrong end. Instead, we put it all in the bin, and we started again once we realised that we'd created documents and lines to follow that people couldn't follow, because we were talking the wrong language and we were presenting it in a way that just didn't make sense. So we went back to basics and we started at the beginning, and we made the paths so they're very easy to follow. A lot of them are pictorial in our succession plans, and we've got charts and handy hints all the way through it, so that as people come and go in our staff, for example, if the librarian was to change, there's some easy plans in place to tell people what their new roles will be, who will step in and assist them, and what things they need to know to be able to get about and function within that job straight away. Also works well when we have our annual change of committee, when we have our elections each year. We have succession planning packs in place that allow our committee to understand what their purpose is and what everyone's role is within that, and how we all work together, and that we're not reliant on one person because of those succession plans.
So within the CRC itself, what is some of the key information that needs to be recorded and kept and made available to all the users of the...
Well, you need to start at the high end to determine that information, like passwords and access codes, who the contact people are, who your contracts are with, what are the things that have to be met under those contracts, so that if someone's changing jobs, they don't come in and find six or 7 days later after an acquittal is due that they didn't fulfil that because they weren't aware of it, or that they had to sign a form to get papers released. So for one part of it is all about that information on the day-to-day things that allow your centre to open and close their doors. They allow us to do the alarms as we come in, open the safe to gain access. They have all our usernames and passwords for our internet and our network. Those are all part of our succession plan. They're not actually in the plan, but in the plan tells you where you can find them and how they are housed and who has access to them. So it doesn't mean that the plan actually has to hold all this information so it's a giant book, but the plan itself says, here's the succession stuff, these are the key things. So this is the succession for the manager's job, this is the succession for the librarian, and this is one volunteer to another, what they might require. So we actually identified the things that were important to ensure a smooth transition from one event, one employment event, one life-changing event to another.
Now let's have a look at some of the values that a good information management delivers. One of the key things, and Lee's already mentioned this, is the reduction in stress, and of course the reduction in costs, in that you're minimising rework. People can find things quickly and easily, so they're not wasting a lot of time trying to find out where information's kept in order for them to do their job. So an information management system needs to be clear and simple, so that anyone coming in on a permanent or temporary basis can quickly learn the policy and the procedures and follow the system. And of course it presents opportunities as well, because if you've got good, clear information management systems, then you can share and collaborate on information. And these days, with the technology that's around, it's really, really easy, if you set things up the right way to start with, to be able to collaborate on projects, events, whether people are in the same location or not. So, but it all comes down to having that structure and the policies and things in place to start with. And it keeps everybody on the same page, literally, if you're talking about documents, so that everybody understands the whole system from top to bottom. Andrew, any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I like that point that you bring up there about presenting opportunities, because I think a lot of times in the area that CRCs work in, sometimes there's some short-term funding opportunities that can present themselves, and So I think if you've got a good information management system, then you can have that information ready to go, which you can then tailor to that funding opportunity, have it in place, and not be sort of having that mad panic to try and find what you need to meet the funder's requirements. So I think that's, to me, is a real big what's in it for me in terms of having that information right at your fingertips when you need it in the right format, so you can just jump in and get ahead of your competitors. So you can actually say, well, here are the things we've been doing, here's what we've been delivering, and here's how it's going to help you, Mr. and Mrs. Funding Body.
Okay, so that's the why. So now we know why we're doing it, and we know what the value is that it gives us in terms of a return on investment in doing, putting a good information management system in place. So Andrew, now take us through and explain a little bit about what it is and how to set it up.
There's probably just a couple of key things to have in place, I guess, when we're setting it up. And the first thing, let's just talk about what is at the heart of an information management system. So basically, as Lee and John have already alluded to, it's just somewhere you need that you can actually store the critical information to run your CRC. And Lee, you just mentioned some of the key things you need in place that will help you, probably some of the key functions that everybody needs to understand to make sure you can open your doors day after day, no matter who's there.
Absolutely. Can I just add to that for a moment? One of the first things that you alluded to on your, John, was the cost saving. We actually did a little exercise and we added up that if we took half an hour every day trying to find something that should have been easy to know, such as the number for the safe or the network address or whatever, and we costed that out. Every time we did that and we lost something that should have been easy to find, you all should do that exercise, because it is incredible how much money you're going to save, how many things that you can spend that money on if you're functioning better. So yes, in regard for key information, I really believe that's important. And it's not just the stuff that opens and closes the door, it's the day-to-day running. It's how who's responsible for doing things is often included in your succession plan, so that you have an expectation of who is going to be doing those things. Key stored information is great, but everyone needs to know how to use it, utilise it, access it, and go back to it if they're not sure.
Brilliant. So to me, a critical thing for you is everybody knows where to get the information and what format, and probably has some of the training to do so, given we mentioned earlier we've got a really broad spectrum of users within a normal CRC. So part of the planning and setting up your information management system, I would imagine, is thinking about who's going to be using that information and what level of training do they have to access that information.
Yeah, definitely. That was what was important to us when we realised that we had to make it so that everyone could understand it, and that they weren't looking through and having to look through an index that didn't make sense, or a wording that meant nothing to them. So we've got things well colour-coded, we have clearly identified files. In the overall succession plans and planning for our business, we identify where you can find those things. And when you mentioned just a little while ago about how you need it to create funding and stuff, opportunities, it's also about the impression you give people when they walk in your door. How easy you are functioning, how well organised you are, so that when your application comes before them or you're talking to them for support for your application, they can go, yes, actually that's a really well functioning centre, and they really do have their finger on the pulse. So it's very important on lots of levels.
And when you say having your finger on the pulse, I think that's another critical part of an information management system, is being able to have a good process for generating new information and finding out where about that is, and being able to utilise that. And I guess I always harp on about funding opportunities, but it could be about perhaps potentially new board members or staff members or volunteers that come into town, or it could be changes in circumstances in the town as well, to think about, well, we've just had this business leave town, perhaps here's an opportunity now for our CRC to fill that gap, to think about a service that isn't currently existing. So perhaps I'd suggest that in your information management system, thinking about what are some of the ways we can generate new information, and again, making sure it can be accessed as well. John, any views from you in terms of what is an information management system from your perspective?
Well, an information management system is a way of keeping the integrity of the data correct, or maintaining the integrity of the data, so that everybody knows they're accessing the latest version of policies and procedures and systems, or client data, client information. Keeping databases up to date is very important. So, it's having that integrity and knowing that what you're accessing is correct and the latest. I had an example recently where I attended a board meeting, and we were bringing people in by video link from overseas and interstate, and we set up on the Wi-Fi network, but nobody knew the password to get onto the Wi-Fi network, and it took us 15 minutes and phone calls before we could get started. That's just crazy. There should be a central point and a consistent way of storing information.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you take the board members' numbers and multiply it by that 15 minutes, how much did that cost everyone combined for that waste of time?
That's right.
It's really important that you recognise how cost efficient it is to have good systems in place.
Absolutely. And I imagine a situation like that, John's not so good for the swear jar, so might get a bit full up at that stage. I just want to reinforce, I guess, Lee, you mentioned earlier in terms of thinking about the information you really need in your information management system. And I guess my key point is that don't set yourself up for a fall, and don't I guess try to avoid drowning in information and having every single bit of information you possibly need to really start thinking about the critical things you must have to keep your CRC functioning no matter what. So to me, it's maybe prioritising that and having a list in place that would help you there. So you mentioned earlier some of the key things you need to have in place.
Yep.
Can you just take us back to that?
Yeah, if I can go back one step, is also I had to personally learn not to be precious about what I knew. I had to be prepared to stand back and let other people start working on things so that they could look at those processes we were putting in place and know that they could understand them. Instead of hovering like a mother around everybody, I actually had to take myself out of that space. And as we identified in the setting up, when we put these things in place so that we had processes to follow, I had to make sure that people could do it. And that's when I realised that I'd done something that was so in the wrong direction. And so we scrapped it all and we started again, and I actually let them work at creating a lot of those information setting up things. So we started with a process where they just walked around and they identified all the things that they needed to do just to do on a day-to-day basis. That was our beginning list. Our list didn't start at the high end, it started at the low end. Where are the keys kept? Where do we have all the numbers put? What are the phone numbers? Who are the contacts? What do we do to start the day? And that really gave us a good focus, because our setting up was based around what we required on a local level in our CRC. Once we got that in place, the rest of the stuff grew from there.
So that really takes us through those core areas of operation. And I think what you've highlighted really well there is just that importance of what people refer to as getting buy-in, making sure everyone's on board, so it's not a system that you're imposing them upon them as the evil manager, but everyone's there ready and something that they understand and can work with comfortably and can probably see the value of. Because in my experience, trying to get people on board with, say, an information management system or similar ones is probably one of the hardest sell jobs, and John, would take one of your supreme sales skills to be able to get people to really say, yeah, love to do that, that'd be great.
Well, it's a bit of a standard joke in our CRC and these days when someone comes across something that we don't have a process for. It's like, we've got to get to and get one of those, and it's quite a competition to make sure that everything has something in place. It's become a bit of fun, but it's also ownership. We all own it now. So if someone introduces something new to the centre or they identify something, they're really, really bought in to the fact that everybody needs to know how to do that. We're all paddling in the same direction now, and gosh, that makes a difference. I'm not there today, for example. I'm here and I can sit quite comfortably knowing that our CRC is going to tick along just fine, and they've got the important things they need to keep running. And I'm not there anymore required day to day. I was the one that had to learn. I was probably the biggest stumbling block in our CRC. I had to learn not to be so precious about my job and to identify the fact that by involving everybody and letting everybody have that buy-in that you talk about, that we created a really great team to work in, and I haven't lost anything, I've gained heaps.
So you've gained some time to work on the more important things.
Yeah, to come out and hang out with you guys.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I was alluding to.
This is
I
right.
think that buying thing is critical as well, because it only takes one person not to follow the system or to stuff it up, basically. A classic is document naming procedures and document naming policies. You know, it's so much easier for people to find things if everybody names documents in the same format, but it only needs one person to not follow the system and the whole thing falls apart. So having that buy-in and getting everybody to realise the benefits, Lee, is fantastic.
Yep, we also have the opportunity during our changeover of staff, we list anything new that might have been created in the file so that we're all aware of what it's called. That's also helped heaps. So having that little contact book where what do I need to know for this week? Oh yeah, look at that, such and such made a new process or has altered something and this is the file name for it. So that's really good. And if we don't agree, we all have a little haggle about it and then we vote and we decide where it goes. So again, we all know where it is because we're all involved in the process.
And that really takes us through that, I guess, how to manage your system and having that agreement through using some simple tools there, like a contact book. I reckon that's a fantastic thing. It doesn't overcomplicate things, but people know where it is and what it's used for. And to me, Lee, it sounds like you've really worked hard to agree on having a system that's consistent. And as John mentioned, there's nobody there. You use a very technical term there. Nobody will stuff it up. So that its consistency is what makes it work, what people agree to, and we'll work through any differences. And I think it's also important to think through how we're going to get the information, what sources are we going to use, and I guess to me, what's in and what's out. Because I think if you start gathering as much as you possibly can, then some of it can become a bit peripheral and all just start to fill it up where it makes it overcomplicated. John or Lee, from your perspective, you've seen systems where people just become hoarders of information, just try more is better rather than thinking that we've actually just got to really think about what's critical.
If I could just start off on that one and then hand over to Lee. One of the classics in that, Andrew, is email. You know, because email is information, and I know some people who never delete an email, and they're all in their inbox, and they've got thousands of the things, and they justify it on the basis of, well, with the search now, if I want to find something, I can just put a search term in and I can find it. That drives me crazy because I just can't work in that sort of lack of structure, if you like. So email for me is an area where you can make a lot of gains as well. Lee?
Oh, I can absolutely add to that. On a personal level, in our CRC, email was huge for us because we always thought you needed to keep everything. But then we had a visitor who came to tell us and to meet with us and just had coffee one day, and they were saying, oh no, they only keep things a certain amount of time. And we're like, oh, how can you live without that? And they're saying, you have to identify what you need because once it's old and it's not relevant anymore. You really need to get it again if you're going to use it again because you don't know how stuff has changed and how the information is still relevant. And so we then sat back and went, actually he's got a point. And we started looking at our emails very differently. We do keep contractual things in a specific archive file, but otherwise it's kept a certain period of time according to our file system, and then it's gone. And that's the same with our process book that we create too. Sometimes we realise that we probably didn't really need a process on how to change the toilet paper, but it was good for a little while and it was a bit of fun. And we do all do it right how we want to do it now, but we don't need that because it's a given. There's some things that are just innate in your system that you don't need. So I agree, you can end up with a book that is just so big you'd never move it around, or a file on your computer that's all digitalised and you can't find anything either. So I really do agree, consistent system for storing information is important, and also the system on how you're going to assume whether it still stays there or whether you dispose of it. And
I think John and Lee, I might borrow you guys a couple of weekends ahead and take you home to my mum and dad's place to help us get that cleaned up. I was there on the weekend and Dad still has footy records from 1983 from a local footy match, and we're trying to clean that out and declutter it a bit, and so it becomes a bit of a challenge. And to me it's a bit about that need versus want. Oh, I want that, and what are you going to do with it? Oh, and sort of an awkward silence. And so to me, I think on a serious note, a lot of it is about that need versus want. Like, we really need this information, I want it just in case.
Yeah, some people are just natural hoarders.
Yep. He grew up on a farm, he had lots of big sheds and you could put a lot of stuff in sheds. Now the sheds aren't so big. It's still got a lot of stuff in it.
That's a really good point to point out, is that you've got to define your space that you want to keep something in. It actually helps you manage it better. If you decide that you're going to give a giant shelf to files and 2 gigabytes of drive to the storage of something, you'll just keep creating bigger than Ben-Hur things. So think about what it is you want to do and where you want to store it, and make it relevant to the type of information you're trying to gather. One of the things we ended up with was much less space on our shelf and a few files that are colour-coded, and it works so much easier than 10 files for each item, so for each subject. So.
And I think that also identifies, I guess, brings us through thinking who can access what. So start to think about things like passwords and somebody having overall responsibility for how the information's managed, and being quite clear on what areas of information, say, the volunteers have access to, what areas of information maybe committee members have access to, and what areas perhaps the manager or key staff have access to. So it's quite clearly defined and delineated. And to me, I was thinking through for a CRC, I think it's useful, say, for everyone to understand how the printing and copying facilities work. So that's obviously something that CRCs use a lot, and perhaps to think about where that information is stored and in what format. But there's probably other information that some of your other people aren't going to need to know about. And so it could be some confidential client files, which that's manager territory only, I'd imagine, Lee.
Yep, prioritising things is an important issue, and we do have files that are encrypted and coded that are only accessed by people that are either have signed the confidentiality agreement direct with the client, or they're not relevant to the day-to-day running of the staff. But also it's a bit like a sandpit game. When everyone knows the rules, we all interact better, because we all, you're not allowed in that space, or the committee come in and they know this is their space but they're not allowed to go into that space, or they're not meant to go into that space. So if they choose to, they ask with respect if they can get there. So having those designated responsibilities really does help everyone play nice together in the sandpit.
I guess to wrap up on the formats of information, we've talked a fair bit about the computerised type stuff, but using something as simple as using the printing facilities. To me, we had Jodie Neal from Boyup Brook who talked about that. They've recorded videos just on the iPad there on how to use the printing facilities there. So to me, it's thinking about those people learn in different ways. So some would like the pictures on the wall, some would prefer the videos. John, you're a flowchart man, that works for you. So it's really give some consideration to what format works, and maybe have multiple formats so it appeals to all people. So that takes us to generating and sharing information in the CRC context. What are the critical bits we need to think about?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. The thing about having good access and easy access to information for people is that you can do things like have team meetings now on a regular basis, and you can have them, keep them shorter and have them more often, which is the way most people prefer to have meetings. It's important to have team meetings and be able to update everybody and keep people up with what's going on. So if you can quickly get access to the information, know that it's up to date and share it, then you can have very short, sharp, stand-up meetings is the way to go these days, people tell me. So it makes all that possible. And again, recording information on projects, on events, on fundraising, and keeping good records is invaluable when it comes to learning lessons from what you've been doing. The number of times I see businesses go down a path that they've been down previously and foolishly make the same mistakes they made last time, because they didn't keep the information, they didn't study it and didn't learn from it. Well, with the quality systems that we've got these days with information management and the technology, it's easy to analyse that information and keep it available. Lee, you're nodding. You've obviously had some experiences along this line.
Well, no, I was actually thinking more along the line of a CRC, because staff turnover can be a little constant, that sometimes something's happened in a previous CRC manager's life, and so having those systems in place means that you don't have new people coming in and repeating the same historical errors each time. And that was quite common out there for a little while, because we weren't leaving behind the lessons learnt and generating the systems to make sure they didn't happen again. So by doing this type of generating and sharing of the information, it's not just about what you do on a day-to-day, it's making sure that you don't repeat those lessons. So, and we did ourselves personally for a little while, and I've been there the whole time, but it's more that these things in place then remind you why 4 years ago you chose not to do that, because you've set this in place now because you know it's going to happen. So we all learn and we continue to learn, and it's important to recognise that we don't all know everything, and certainly if you're like me, you don't always remember everything.
Yes, it's always better to learn from other people's mistakes rather than make them yourself or to repeat them. So get somebody else to have the learning for you.
Another way, John, on that is to, when you're having your team meetings, or perhaps you run an event or you're finishing up a major project, is just ask 3 simple questions of people that have been involved, and that's the what, the so what, and the now what. So what did you do? So what does this mean in terms of the CRC business? Now what are we going to change next time? So they're just 3 easy questions. It's not too overly complicated. It's the what, the so what, and the now what.
And keeping people up to date with what's going on, whether it be events, projects, fundraising, things like that, again, is so much easier if you've got good data that you've collected. And again, with databases and customer information, things like that, marketing information, keeping your database up to date is just absolutely vital. So having a good process and system in place to keep people's records and things up to date. So, Andrew, you've had some experience in that area?
Well, actually, I wanted to pick up on the point that Jodie Neal does at Boyup Brook CRC, and they just do a one-page update every week for staff of the key things that have been happening and the information they need to know. So it's not something that's going to take a huge amount of time for them, but it's really valuable to making sure everyone, again, is on the same page as you mentioned earlier. So that short, sharp, done.
Interviews, of course, if you're in succession, you're going to be talking to and interviewing all kinds of people. So now you've got technology, you don't need to bring people in to the CRC necessarily to do the interview. You can do it by video, and you can record those and keep them. So there's all sorts of things that you can do. And communities of practice, which is a fancy term for saying online communities and online sharing of information. So, Andrew, I know that's something that you were pretty keen on as well.
I'm a big rat for them, John, and I'm part of a couple of them. And it's really, the community practice is a fancy term for people who've got a similar interest or doing a similar thing, working together and sharing their information and experiences. So it could be perhaps CRCs in one particular region who get together by maybe a conference call or a video hookup once a quarter to talk about some of the issues they've been dealing with and how they've gone about it. So Lee, I'd imagine there's a lot of CRCs in your area that maybe stay reasonably closely connected and have the opportunity to connect through your video conferencing facilities and even a face-to-face meeting, dare I mention it, to throw around some ideas as an opportunity.
Yep, definitely happens. Sometimes it's just a quick phone call because the neighbouring CRC or I might want to know something from them. How did they deal with? What did they do? The sharing of information is really good, and it's because people are prepared to share. With our CRCs, when we get together and we share, we're all passionate about it, and we're sharing because of our passion. So we're really prepared to share. It's not that precious thing again where I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing. When we all share, we actually get bigger outcomes, and we get together regularly around our area, and we video conference across the state probably once a month or more. And it's amazing how you can just build on what you're already practicing and go, I can just tweak that little bit more. It's very important, and it's all about the sharing of information. Some things are, of course, personal to your CRC, but always remember, if you give out and you share with your communities of practice, that you will also benefit from that.
Great tip there. And I think that I've seen it also generate a lot of energy with a group as well. And I remember, John, when we were doing the governance program, we had Gordon Marwick, who's chair of the York CRC. One of the things that struck Gordon was when he went to the first state conference, how the energy that from all the CRCs and how that really actually convinced him to become chair of the CRC when he was asked. So things like those meetings, Lee, really, I understand, generate a heap of energy, a heap of enthusiasm, and help people get recharged again, I guess, and maintain their enthusiasm even when things may be a bit challenging in your lives. I want to move on and talk a wee bit now about policies and procedures, and just to reinforce that CRC should be using MSO to be able to access some good policies and procedures that are simple, easy to find, and help you out, and how important it is to have policies and procedures in place to help structure your information management system, and they're there right at your fingertips. So there's a couple of things there like policy templates, things that can help you with your filing and records management. And John, you mentioned right from the start how important it is to make sure that everyone's on the same page and we're all using the same approach. So having a template approach, I think, would help a lot. And Lee, you've mentioned colour coding of your files so that everyone's using, I guess, the same system, the same templates all the way through, so that when anybody moves on, it's all going to work the same way.
Absolutely. Templates are about cost saving again. You don't have to sit there and try and work out how you want to write something up. You've just got to fill the spaces in that have already been predetermined as important. Doesn't mean that you can't add other topics on that same template, but at least you don't have to start from scratch every time. Every 15 minutes you save is $1 in your pocket or more.
And there's also information sheets on MSO, so they'll give you some background into things like I just mentioned, your filing systems, your policies and procedures. Things are just going to make it easier for you, like Lee mentioned, without you having to waste time doing it again. It's there in place for you, so make the most of it, is my advice there.
Yes, you can look to technology as well for help with managing your records and keeping, making sure that people are working on the latest version of the document all the time as well. So there's a lot of help out there.
So examples, please. Technology, you're Mr. Techno.
Microsoft SharePoint is a very simple and inexpensive way of controlling documents, so that you keep all your documents stored in one place. If somebody wants to work on a document and update it, then they check it out, nobody else can access it. And then when they've updated it and checked it back in, then the latest version's there. So it's just doing that. I guess it's putting a bit of policing and a bit of control on it. But it's a good Microsoft, it's been around for years, and it's not an expensive implementation.
No, in fact, most CRCs can access it under the funded programs that are available through the Microsoft funding. So it's readily available if you want to use it. Another one that we use is Google Docs. So if we're creating a document across the network and several CRCs are working on it, we'll upload it in there so we're all working on the document and it is current. So there's no toing and froing of emails and people getting it wrong or working on the wrong document. We just all get to share the same document and away we go. So there are some really good technology things in there that can help you with that stuff.
Great, simple, practical tips, and that's what this program's all about. So let's do a quick recap now that we've covered some of the resources that you've got available to you there in terms of the information sheets as well as the policy templates. So in this episode, things we've covered, we've talked about the actual value of having a system, and that's the critical word here is having a system in place for managing your information. We've talked about some ideas on setting up your system, and also talked about the importance of having consistency in managing your system. Make sure from here that this doesn't just become a half hour of your life you'll never have again. It's really important that you go into the workbook and look at the 3 things that you're going to implement from this episode, and I'd suggest in this case implement consistently in terms of information management. Coming up next, we'll be looking at implementation. So we'll be bringing the previous 3 episodes together and getting down to that really practical crunch end of things to say, here's how we implement your succession plan. So we're really looking forward to working with you on that again. Thanks, John. Great to have you here on board. Looking forward to our next episode when you're back with us again.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, we'll see you again soon.
And Lee, fantastic. Thanks for making the sojourn up from Pingelly. I believe you're going to be joining us on our next episode as well, so I'm really looking forward to getting some more of that practical, here is how it is info from Pingelly. So
yep,
thanks
really
for your
looking
time.
forward to it. Thanks for having me.
So it's now goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Toodle pip from me.
Bye now. And thanks, folks, and we'll see you on episode 4. Bye now.